Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast. My name is James Dixon, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you are tuning in to today's podcast from. And a very warm welcome to today's podcast guest. Thom Greybe is the Digital Creative Director at Avantgarde and joins us today as, I should say, a last-minute super sub off the bench. We've dragged Thom off the bench today to stand in for a guest that was due to join us. And Thom's very kindly joined the podcast for the first time. Thom, welcome to the Event Industry News podcast.
Thank you.
As I said in Thom's introduction, he's the Digital Creative Director at Avantgarde. And the best place to start for those who haven't come across that name before is to ask a little bit about Avantgarde and what it is that the agency does.
Yeah, sure. So I can definitely do that. I can help out. We are a global brand experience agency. It's basically experience experts. I think what we do is to know all the different touch points and understand them all, and then best figure out when to make that conversation with the people moving through that. We offer quite a wide range of services from strat, creative design, digital, social, content, data, but with that experience edge. And we have an integrated approach from my side, certainly with digital as an important integral part of that. But just generally, the main company is over 12 offices with like 700 people worldwide. And we've been in business over 30 years. So they, the main business located in Munich, and, breadth of clients, automotive, Mercedes, BMW, also Lufthansa, Allianz, Porsche. So quite a varied amount. Obviously, I'm part of the London office. Sure. We're kind of the global hub of the group. We deal with quite a lot of international projects.
Sure.
And we also obviously have quite varied sort of digital installations, which is part of the reason why I find myself here. So that's kind of our little story.
Absolutely. And we should put, I know you said over 30 years old, but we should say, in 1985 is the founders, it's 35 years this year. And, when you use a term sort of experts or leaders in a particular area, a lot of companies term themselves with those sort of phrases and terminology. But, any company, from my point of view, that's been in business for 35 years in a particular industry certainly qualifies them to class themselves as experts and offer opinion and guidance on an industry with that level of reference. And just before we get on to talking about some of the things that we want to talk about today, what's your own sort of personal background prior to your current role at Avantgarde?
Yeah, sure. So as I think as we'll get into, I actually come from a traditional advertising background. So I started in sort of, flash banners. I'm sure people who've dealt with that will know what that is. But I worked from that sort of end up, and that sort of direct marketing. And then, from sort of BTL to ATL, and I've worked for some larger, conglomerate advertising agencies and seen all different facets of it. Finally, about a year and a half ago, I made the move over to the experiential side. To see what they're doing with digital, basically, because it seemed more interesting from my point of view as a creative working in digital. That seemed to be the space that was really kind of opening up.
Sure. The first thing I'm going to ask is to maybe an opinion on the term experiential, because a lot of people will perhaps straight away pigeonhole, for want of a better phrase, the term experiential, as obviously it's derived from experience, but term it as a live event. People are maybe, for want of a better phrase, confusing experiential as being exclusively about live events, whereas actually to offer somebody an experience, it doesn't necessarily have to be about a live event. It can apply to many different strands of vertical areas of marketing and communication as a whole. Is my thought on it.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think you're starting to see that as well. As I say, our moniker is a global brand experience agency, so not experiential. We deliver experiences, and they talk about this experience economy. That's very much what's happening nowadays as well, is that people
Yeah.
would prefer to have an experience than they would to have something physical. And I think there's some press about that as well.
Sure.
So very much in terms of like delivering experiences, that's where we are. We're trying to tell a story with what we're doing, and we're trying to find, as I alluded to earlier, the right points to do that. So what are those touch points? They could be social, they could be digital, they could be physical, and then digital in a sense, and a lot of people just think it's screen-based stuff, and that's the interesting side of experiential, is we're actually, or experience, that we're actually moving over to more kind of interesting ways to harness digital. So in unexpected sort of methods. So it's kind of interesting from that point of view.
How would some of those unexpected methods manifest themselves?
So you can have quite a lot of fun with obviously more physical digital installations. So I think that's things that actually you can push and pull and touch that create an experience that is either visual or haptic. You know, obviously people talk about haptic feedback, and that sort of area is definitely a space where we're starting to see a lot of brands kind of wanting to explore something that's new and fresh, and also trying to find ways in which we can create that experience, because that's what people want, right? They want to go somewhere and feel something and see something different. And so I don't think it's digital necessarily relates just to screen-based content in the experience arena. I think it actually kind of starts to become a lot more interesting, a lot more part of the storytelling, which is, again, one of the reasons why I find myself in the experience arena now versus in the advertising arena, where, you know, I think they're sort of starting to push out the more creative side of digital and become more kind of formulaic in a sense.
I'm curious to ask your opinion on something. It's something that somebody said on the podcast actually a few weeks ago, which is that when we look at what people often refer to as traditional forms of advertising, so you may think radio or television, or so actually many of the forms that we label as traditional forms and not digital advertising and marketing are actually digital now. Because if you think TV, hardly anybody watches TV through an analog signal anymore. It's all done digitally, which allows advertisers to target specifically by region or demographic or chat, whatever it may be. The same with radio now. More and more people listen to radio through things like smart speakers, and by listening through a digital, you know, signal, if you can call it that, advertisers can then have 10 different radio adverts that will play specifically where, you know, certain region is, or where somebody's listening in from, or for a type of radio station. You know, the actual lines are becoming a lot more blurred than they were maybe 5 or 6 years ago when we referred to digital marketing.
Yeah, and I think that's actually it's quite a simple way to describe that. Is one is a distribution service, and that's the way in which things get to you, and the other one is the way in which we actually develop them. So and then that is a common misconception. You're quite right. In a lot of senses, people will understand things to be digital is anything that is you know, created for these digital channels, but that's completely incorrect. In fact, what you're seeing is a lot more investment in content. And that is produced in a traditional manner. That has your director, your cinematographer, your crew, everything, you know. So we're developing content at a rapid rate and delivering it on digital channels, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is digital. Interesting things would be like Bandersnatch. So that's an example of something where they've actually taken a traditional method and completely changing the game and saying to people, right, well, we're going to now allow you to choose how you want to go, and where you can go, what you can see, how it works. And that is probably more an example of delivery of a digital content in a digital space, because they're using the system of Netflix to, even though it's a digital streaming service, it's a traditional, it's just the delivery method is different.
Absolutely. There's a key word that stands out in your job title to me as digital creative director, and that's the term creative. And having you know, worked for a number of years now with various different hats on, literally, and finding yourself what you do now, do you find that with the means that you now have at your disposal, and with this, and with the backing of an agency, the size, and with the experience of Avantgarde, the creative side of you is allowed to flourish more. Did you feel perhaps that previously, as a creative person, you were prohibited from doing what you would like to do because the means to do it wasn't necessarily there?
I think it comes back to having, I guess, in the different. This is the difference between, I think, currently now the role of your normal advertising agency and the experiential or the experience one, is that effectively in those areas they develop content that is based on what can be sold, what spaces can we sell, where can we place this content. So you have a predefined box which you need to fulfill, and you no longer have that sort of arena where you go, okay, you've got a space. If you versus it in the experience area, you've got a space, what can you do? That's a completely different landscape to you have a box that is 69, you've got 30 seconds, it needs to have the TV ad in it.
Sure.
So in terms of breaking out those boxes and going, okay, which is more fun? 100% the space where you can just do whatever. What can you imagine? What can you do? Like, and I think that specifically for digital, I think, you have to understand a lot of the inner workings of these things. So creative in that sense is not only, you need to understand the mechanics of something to be able to use it to its full potential. So again, when you talk about the sort of traditional side of it, when I was in that arena, when they stopped sort of making, mini sites, things like that, really exploring that sort of creative side of how you deliver marketing, it didn't provide you with that sort of appetite to sort of go, okay, well, what's the space I can work in now, and what can I do? And so having that opportunity to go, okay, well, we can have, a VR or an AR, or we can have a touchscreen interface that triggers something else over here. It doesn't matter. You can just decide and develop and work with a client to create something that is completely different to anything you've seen before. So yeah, 100%, that arena offers more opportunity to be creative in a digital and like technological sense.
Well, when it comes to understanding these inner workings and mechanics of all of these different opportunities, I suppose, that are available to you, whether that be software, that be hardware, is it difficult to keep up, with there being so much available to you, to actually maintain that clear understanding of what all of these different opportunities can present, and how you can utilize the best for your clients?
I think if you enjoy it, I don't think so. I mean, I think you've got to think about what things there are out there. So, I've fortunate enough, you buy a VR set, because you're like, okay, I need to play with this. I need to understand how it works. So part of it is playing games, and you're sitting there going, okay, well, that's, somewhere I can explore. So if you have an interest in it and you want to push those areas, and you want to know how these things work, then 100%. So you need to have an interest in technology, obviously. I think, to lean on that, my background was computer graphics. I studied at Bournemouth, and then I moved into more programming, and then I sort of made the leap and sort of started to move towards more design and then creative. So it's quite an arc, but it means that from a point of view of understanding the technical nature behind things, it allows you to very much be able to develop at the sort of edge of what we're talking about, and so that offers. So you've got to have that technical interest along with the understanding, and then I think you would naturally gravitate towards trying new things and exploring with new devices and technologies, and again, because of this experience space, we get to explore some of these new technologies. Like right now in the office, we have a transparent ghost LED screen we're testing content on for stuff we're developing. That's fun. This is an area this is bleeding edge stuff, and you get to take the technology out, you get to see how it works, you get to test and find out all the stuff, at the forefront of it. So that, is a lot of fun.
And do you find that because of the way that, just as consumers as people, we are in this digital age where you go out to just do your shopping, and you will experience and encounter and interact with, technological touch points and digital touch points, whether that be, going through the self-checkout at the supermarket, is a way of us now, because of our understanding of digital technology, we know instinctively how to go and use those types of devices now. Are you able to then source inspiration from things that you just see in day-to-day life that you think, actually, we could apply that to a client or for a particular application? Has it sort of opened up the possibilities by seeing all of this stuff in day-to-day life?
I think so. I mean, I think we all get used. We all get used to it, don't we? We've all got touch phones. We're all sort of doing that. Your children are picking them up and using them immediately. So you all become quite used to it. And there's kind of an interesting side note to that when you're developing content. And I used to have quite a few battles with people where it was sort of like, make sure this thing is prominent or a call to action is prominent. And to a certain extent, it starts to get to the point where you're almost placating people, because ultimately they know how to use these devices now. They know how to react to them. And the more intelligent stuff is being more subtle and more subtle about how you bring people into it and draw people along those sort of journeys. I think, again, because you're using these things in environments and spaces and things that you wouldn't normally use, or things that you wouldn't normally do, like an 84-inch touchscreen, people don't have at their home and they don't use them normally. So you put it in a big hall with a load of people and you don't know how they're going to react. You don't know the exact things. So you have to observe, you have to look, and you take learnings from some of these environments and you see how people deal. And I think it's quite funny to see that people actually have a much lower tolerance for getting things wrong when everyone's watching. So if you're in a space, you have to be so direct about what they need to do on that screen, because if they make a mistake, they feel silly and they leave, which is not what you want, right?
And there must be a real challenge there of designing, the right content to go on there to challenge people and to get them to maybe to interact and delve into the content that you are putting together for any given client, whilst also making it accessible and making them not feel foolish if they are going to do it in public spaces. That balance of content must be really tricky now when we are dealing with so many more touch interfaces, aren't we? And it's not just touch screens, we should point out as well, because we're now beyond that as well, aren't we? We're in, where any surface can now be turned into an interactive touch point.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've experienced that as well. We've developed content that is a radar beam. So it is proper Minority Report. And the irony is that you expect these things to be understood from your perspective. And when you see people using them, it's such an interesting thing, because, immediately they go up to a screen, which is what they're looking at. And there's a radar beam, but they go and touch the screen, because they're so used to touching the screen. They don't know that thing is there, and they're meant to use it like, gesture controlled. And that's just because we're so used to touch devices. So there's a really kind of interesting area. And that's what I say when you sort of develop that content. And the funny thing is, from a digital screen-based development, you're always going, okay, what size screen? Do I do mobile first? How do I develop this stuff? Let's do the UX, the UI, all this sort of stuff. And now when you're dealing with some sort of touchscreen stuff, you go, well, how short will the people be? How tall will they be? Will they be able to reach these things? Do people, for some reason, will not look down? They look up. So put anything at the bottom, they won't touch it. They won't even look at it. There's some really interesting sort of findings from that sort of user interface of screens, like touch screens, large touch screens, or large touch devices, or blank canvases. However, like you say, big walls can be interactive, however you set it up. So it's all an exploration, which is fun.
It's interesting, isn't it? And there are, for every solution that's presented or new opportunity that's presented to us, 10 other considerations then flag themselves up when you're looking to do something. Now, and just as a reference, I was talking to a company last year on the podcast about an installation that they'd done at the Eureka Museum up in Halifax in West Yorkshire, an interactive projected interactive content, and how they've just got to be careful where they put the projectors in, because where the venue had originally said they wanted them, they pointed out that actually when people stand in front of the interactive wall, they're going to actually cast a shadow onto the wall and mask, 30% of the content that they're actually being asked to interact with. And so then they have to rethink where everything's going to go. So, I guess you probably work in a similar realm where for every creative idea that you come up with, you probably then presented with 10 obstacles that you have to, deal with in order to achieve that.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously that's like a technical, physical sort of complication, but there are technical software complications and how things talk to each other, how it works. A lot of the stuff now is developing systems that can be then effectively both global and local, or global, as they say. So you can have a central sort of system that then has multiple versions of, say, an experience for the brand to distribute. So they control one central place and they distribute their brand on these other sort of areas. And can that be, a touch screen? Can it be a touch table? Can it be projection based? Can it be? But it's all controlled by one central thing. And there's a lot of different softwares that are being developed. Your own software you can develop, and those ramifications about how that all fits together, along with a show control for, say, museums. It's also challenging for sure, but that's part of it, right? So you've got that area,
Absolutely. And when you mentioned at the start of the episode that the London office, deals with a lot of international clients, one thing that I guess you must have to deal with is a project that requires the same thing, a bit of an ignorant term, but the same thing to be delivered in multiple languages. So maybe not just written content, but with digital interaction now and digital experiences, you will probably have audible content as well as written content that you are considering to have to deliver and develop and give back to the client in multiple language formats. Is that something that crops up regularly, and is it something that you guys are dealing with more often now?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think over 70% of the work we do is distributed on a larger network. So we were in Chicago only last year delivering something, and obviously that's all US English, but then we could be in Geneva or Frankfurt, and that's got to be in French, English, and German. So you definitely look at the way in which you can approach design, and it can be flexible design. I think certainly some of my previous knowledge in advertising, we would develop for, EMEA or APAC. And so we would understand that you would need to leave space. So there's some learnings, and there's an interesting diversion, or like conversion, I should say, or on how the two different types of kind of disciplines are kind of coming together. And again, I think this sort of comes to that point that I was talking around about how I think there's almost a bit of a digital creative drain from the advertising sector into this experience area, where I think you've got more space to explore and more interesting things to develop in the technical digital sort of arena. And I think that's where, having that skill set of being from an advertising background and understanding all these different things about language length and more of a marketeer's hat on, you can really start to create a great story for a client in that space, completely different kind of delivery of that.
Are we at a stage now? We often talk about trends, and I'm certainly guilty on this podcast of saying to people in the past, what do you see as the forthcoming trends? Especially at this time of year, we're recording this just at the end of January, so we're fundamentally at the start of a calendar year. And I ask people what the trends, but realistically, and stepping out of that box for a second, is there such a thing as trends anymore in any sort of given business or in the advertising industry? Or are we at a stage now where we have so much creative opportunity available to us that it's not about following trends, it's about creating what works for any given project?
I guess so. I think trends are built by pioneers, aren't they? So somebody will pioneer something, and then that will be exalted as amazing, and then you will follow it. and other people will mimic it. I guess and there's an element of the zeitgeist about that as well. As what is everyone doing? And I think there's there's going to be a continuum of trends. I think it's quite sort of bold to sort of put that out there, what you think that will be. I'm not as opinionated on those things. I suppose you might say there'll be, certainly we've had quite a few interesting chats with people that are delivering more VR and AR stuff. So people are more likely to put devices on them, become more engaged with them. We've met some really interesting partners that are doing, whether it's screen-based or even more sort of curated sort of VR experiences. And that doesn't mean that it's like a CG animated or anything like that. They actually, there's a new type of a red camera that shoots in 360, and they're like a film camera. So they set up the lighting, they make sure the stories, they cast actors, and they really bring people into these things and allow them to tell a much more narrative-based story in that. So I think there's going to be a lean massively, well, not massively, but there's definitely an influx of that starting to happen and more experience. But the big problem comes in with experience, and it keeps coming up with a lot of our clients, is experience for one versus experience for everyone. So I think there's a bit of a rub there about being able to have everyone feel the same and see the same, and not just doing the experience for one. So we are seeing some experience rooms go in. So it's probably using that 360 content, but in a bigger space, so that they can really get involved with it. So I mean, I'd probably put my hat in that ring if I was gonna.
Excellent. Our guest today on the podcast is Thom Greybe. Thom is the Digital Creative Director at Avantgarde. And on today's podcast, we've been talking about not so much trends. I thought it might go down the route of looking at trends, but actually it's more than that. It's looking at how agencies like Avantgarde now, and particularly ones that have been in business as long as them, are really utilising what's available to them in this current digital age, and creating content and experiences for their clients that really take advantage of the control that we now have with the digital streams available to us. Thom, it's been great to have you on the podcast. And once again, as I said at the start, thanks for stepping in at relatively short notice to join us as a guest today. It's been great to have you on, and we should always make a log of the people who really know what they're talking about on this podcast, and make sure that we tap into them at some point in the future. So hopefully we'll get you back on the podcast again to tap into some more of that knowledge, Thom.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. If you're listening to the audio version of today's podcast, don't forget to hop over to eventindustrynews.com, where you can check out video versions of all the podcasts, as well as the latest news, features, and supplements from Event Industry News. Of course, conversely, if you're watching this on the website, hello to you, and hop on to your chosen podcast downloader on your mobile device, and you can listen to audio versions of all of our podcasts on your commute to and from work, or whilst you're out and about working at your events. Thanks again to our guest today, Thom Greybe from Avantgarde, and we'll see you on the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. My name is James Dixon. Goodbye.